we had actually done the branding for home service companies. And when we added up the revenue, it actually came out to over $2 billion. A lot of mistakes can be made just by not knowing. I think that's the beauty of disruptive branding and the concept of being branded versus blanded. The more you look, the more you're going to attract people that are less willing to pay a premium for your service. I mean, colors are really, really important. So the way that we typically go about choosing colors for any particular company is really...
What's going on, guys? Today I'm joined by Dan Antonelli. He is also a New Jersey-based business owner, so it's super awesome to connect with him today. He's actually the president of KickCharge Creative, so I'm sure a lot of you guys have probably come across their business at some point. So I'm super excited to dive into it with you today, Dan.
What's up, Michael?
So the first thing I want to dive into, I always like to start with a quick background check just so people have an idea of who they're listening to. Do you mind just sharing a bit about your background and kind of what businesses you're involved in?
Absolutely, sure. I started the company, actually we're in our 29th year. I started it when I was 27. And when I started the company, it was based around the idea that I thought it would be really amazing if there was a single source that a home service company or a contractor could go to provide like their logo, their truck lettering, and do a brochure for them, do a website for them, do their business cards, help them with all those things. So initially, my background before that was I went to study advertising at the University of Scranton, and even before that I was actually working as a sign painter and a hand letterer. So I originally started hand lettering trucks when I think the first truck I did when I was 15 years old, and it was for a home service contractor, actually. It's kind of funny. And I did it in my parents' backyard, and I just fell in love with the idea of lettering, and working with other owners was really something that I just really enjoyed. But my parents didn't want me to become a sign painter, so they said, you have to go to college, and I went to college. And while I was in college, obviously, I studied a lot about advertising and communications and things like that. And then when I graduated, I worked as a graphic designer in New York City for about 5 years and started the business on the side. So like a lot of companies, it was my side hustle. I was commuting into New York City, 5 days a week, and then I would come home and work on my business. And I did that for probably like a year and a half. And then it just started getting really, really crazy, where I was doing like 90-hour, 100-hour weeks. And I was just like really, really killing myself. And finally I felt like I had enough business that I could quit my day job. And I worked from home for a little while, and then in 2007 I got an office and we had employees and things like that. Up until that point, I had pretty much worked by myself, or had an occasional employee work sort of for me at the house, which was a little weird. And then finally I got, like I said, I got an office, and we moved out of that office in 2017 after building this space. So currently right now we have 35 employees right now, and we are pretty much specifically focused on branding for home service companies. This year we'll probably do in excess of 300 home service brands we'll create. So that will include doing sometimes the naming, the brand development, the wrap design, their brochures. We can help with web, we can help with social media, and basically just, again, that concept of a single place to keep everything really looking on brand is really our philosophy.
That's awesome. So you guys are working with, a few hundred home service businesses, and basically like every type of home business, from my understanding.
Correct. Yes. At this point, I would say we've created the brands for over 2,500 home service companies. At this point, we actually just found out this really interesting stat the other day, where we figured out that we had actually done the branding for over 100 home service companies that are over $10 million in revenue. And when we added up the revenue numbers for those 100 plus, it actually came out to over $2 billion in revenue that we've created the brands for those home service companies. Of course, we have a ton that are under 10 million in revenue. But the other interesting thing was that out of the 100 plus, I think it was a little over 100, but 20%, only 20% of those companies were actually over 10 million in revenue when they hired us. The bulk of them were actually under 10 million in revenue. Some of them were, $1 million in revenue. So, we work with all different sizes. We work with like brand new startups. We work with guys that, or owners that just have 100,000 in revenue, all the way up there. So we don't really, draw a distinction between that. You're going to get the same amount. It takes the same amount of work essentially to provide that service. But it was kind of interesting just seeing how many of those companies had grown after the rebrand. And that's, something we're all really proud of. We've done some of the probably most well-known brands within the home service space, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, 100%. That's awesome. And that's taking a fraction of the total customers you worked with. So in reality, I mean, it's probably, $5+ billion, which is nuts to think about.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So, and I'm curious, I definitely want to dive into branding. I think that's going to be a big focus for today because I think that's just so important for businesses. But first off, I'm just curious, with those 35 team members, being that you do have that office, are you guys a, partially in-person, partially virtual business, or is everybody, working in office?
We have about 25 that are in person, and we have about 10 that are remote.
Gotcha. Okay. And which type of roles are you guys keeping in person versus remote?
Right now, the bulk of the remote employees are the branding and the illustrators that work for us. So those people are really, really hard to come by. So it's a very, very unique skill set to be able to know how to do illustration, to know how to do branding, and then to know how to apply those assets to a vehicle. So to give you kind of an example, like when we hired the last two branding / logo designers to work for us, we had over 200 applications for that, for basically two open positions. And out of the 200 applications, we interviewed 4 people and we hired 2. That's literally, they're like 1 in 100, these types of people. To be honest with you. So it's a very, very unique skill set. And then to be able to find somebody local to us with that skill set just proved to be something that we couldn't do. So we've been remote with some of them for a really long time, and we make it work. It's, it works out fine.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, well, cool. So let's go ahead and dive into branding. I'm super excited to talk about this with you because I know that's obviously a huge focus for you guys. And I think this is super undervalued in our industry specifically. A lot of pressure washing businesses, especially when they're first getting started, they put branding in the back burner and don't think much of it. So I want to first off just get started by prefacing why you believe branding is so important.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a critical first step for any business. So certainly when you're first starting, a lot of mistakes can be made just by not knowing, right? So you could look at naming your home service business or your power washing business as sort of the step one, right? So you can make a lot of very costly errors just right there. And so, thinking about how important it is getting that first step right, and then knowing and understanding how branding plays a role in the psychology of working with consumers and home consumers. So you have to think about ways in which you can build brands that, first of all, are sticky and memorable. So the idea that, Mrs. Jones, who's likely the person that's going to be reaching out to hire you, what can you do to make your brand name memorable? What can you do to make it so maybe she saw your truck on your neighbor's driveway or her neighbor's driveway? How would she remember that in 6 months? What are the things that maybe you might think about in terms of developing an image, developing a brand, developing a disruptive truck wrap that would cause her to remember your company later on? And I think that that's the part, and that's the beauty of really disruptive branding and the concept of being branded versus blanded, is the idea that when that homeowner is ready for service, she remembers that name. Otherwise, the other alternative is that she goes on Google and she types in power washing near me. And now you're paying for that lead if you're not showing up organically. So a lot of companies make the mistake of having, either very poor branding or brands that people don't remember. They have names that people can't remember. A lot of these mistakes happen. And the way that they try to overcome that is they continue to need to spend more on their paid ads, need to spend more with Google. And so again, like starting from day one, like that name becomes such a critical first step. And then how do we create a brand that feels memorable to that consumer that is your ideal target, right? So, the nice thing about, or the opportunity that you have, especially in the power washing world, is, a lot of times you've got, big trailers, you've got trucks, all those things can be really, really effective forms of advertising, so long as they're actually leveraged correctly. And, in a lot of instances, you see, just brands that don't work well for that medium. They're difficult to read, or they look like everyone else's. So, you're going to you could go on Google right now and you could type in power washing logos, and you're going to see a whole boatload of logos that all look exactly the same. And so that's another thing just to really keep in mind is what can you do with your brand that is different than what everyone else is doing, right? So when we do branding, that's one thing we're looking at who your competitors are, what brand colors do they use, what types of brands do they have, do they use mascots, do they not use mascots, do they use the spray wand in their logo? A lot of the stereotypical things you see are actually things you don't want to do. You want to do the opposite of those things because that's more likely to become sticky in someone's mind, right? So, I think the book that I wrote talks a lot about that. Naming is actually the biggest chapter in the entire book. And I think that that's one aspect that unfortunately so many home service companies get wrong. So if nothing else, make sure that you start with a name that is sticky, that is memorable. Things to avoid would be last name brands, names that use initials like TJ Power Washing. Why would Mrs. Jones ever remember that? What would cause her to actually remember that versus, something that is a little bit more sticky, something that even evokes a very specific visual to go along with it.
I like that you gave an example of what is not memorable. Using your name, I think is a terrible idea and so many people do it. But what would be a good example of something that actually is sticky and people actually remember? I guess first we can focus on the name and then move into, designing. But in terms of name, what are some stuff that, I guess what are some things people should consider when, creating the name? Sure.
Yeah. I mean, think about names, first of all, that maybe evoke a specific visual. For example, we just named a roofing company in South Jersey or near Philly called Rooster Roofing. So I just told you the name is Rooster Roofing. You don't know what that logo looks like, but I bet you have an idea of what that logo looks like, right? So you think about the sea of clip art rooftop logos that are so common within the roofing industry. And now all of a sudden you've got a roofing company that's using a rooster as their mascot. Wouldn't you remember that more than TJS Roofing, right? So names that evoke visuals are ones that do very well because it's very easy to marry up a large graphic with that name. The other thing to think about is names that evoke a promise, right? And that's why, again, last name and initial based brands are very challenging because if I say, hey, it's Antonelli Power Washing, but you've never heard of me, well, so what? Why would I think that Antonelli Power Washing is going to be an amazing service provider for me? But Pro Wash, now it's a very common name. I wouldn't say to use Pro Wash, but you're okay, they're professional and, I understand Pro Wash, right? So I kind of assign a premium to my expectation of what that deliverable might look like. And the other piece too that you have to keep in mind too is everything that you're doing with branding, whether it's with the name, the logo on the side of the truck, or what they see online, et cetera, all those things are essentially trying to control the conversation before it even transpires, right? So before they call you, before that you get there to ring the doorbell, you're setting up a level of expectation as to what your service might be like, right? So if everything looks real super amateurish, then the expectation for the homeowner is that you're going to be inexpensive and the cheapest guy around, and maybe he'll show up. I hope he's insured, all these things. But when you present everything in a very high level visual to go along with it, it sets the expectation that, okay, I know I'm not going to get the cheapest power washer here, but he's insured. I'm sure he's going to do an amazing job, and he looks professional, right? So you attract, basically what you put out is what you attract. So the more homegrown you look, the more you're going to attract people that are less willing to pay a premium for your service. So you could look at the effect of brand on average tickets, and that's a huge thing. Like, oh my God, like we see people and their biggest complaint, and you probably hear it all at the same time, Michael, is like, I can't get paid enough. No one wants to pay. No one's going to pay me this much money to do power washing for their home or their driveway, whatever the case may be. And then a lot of times you look at the branding and you're like, well, I know why you can't get paid more for your work, because you don't look like you deserve to be paid more for your work. So definitely thinking about how all that translates into the psychology of that homeowner and justifying whether or not they think they should pay you more than the other guy. And if you look amateurish, if you look not professional in the way all your things are put together, then my assumption as a homeowner is that you're going to be inexpensive, cheaper than everyone else. And maybe that's the type of contractor I'm looking for. So you fit the bill. But when you complain and you say, hey, I can't increase my average tickets, have you given the homeowner a reason to believe that there's a premium that they should pay for your service? If not, then you can't complain about it. Like, that's what you put out is what you're going to get back.
That makes a lot of sense. From the homeowner's perspective, I feel like most people make a snap decision of what your company is worth within the first interaction. And usually that's them seeing your logo or your name or basically your branding. So if in that first interaction, they're already assuming you're some cheap, low budget company, then they're only going to pay so much for your services.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%.
Cool. So the name makes sense. And also the concept around, it was Rooster Roofing or something similar to that, where it's very just different and unique. That makes you stand out a lot. It also, I'm curious, because it is so random, like, Rooster is completely irrelevant to roofing. Do you guys make that tie in some way, or is it just completely irrelevant, but it's that, memorability that makes it make sense?
In that particular case, the Rooster's, the logo is actually standing on like a rooftop. And then on the truck wrap design that we integrated for them, you could see shingles. So we did visually connect those dots and make it look like they belong together. And obviously, it's really important, obviously, for them to not only just see the brand name Rooster, but to connect the idea of roofing with it. So 100% you want to try to connect those dots. I'll give you an example, Michael. Like a couple of years ago, we did a brand for a carpet cleaner, right? And the name of the company was Carpet Chemist. And we developed the branding for it. We did the wrap design for it, a bunch of marketing materials. They're actually a national franchise right now. But to do something different, right, to try to make the truck wrap itself disruptive and to stand out, we wound up taking those clear Christmas ornaments that they have that hang, and they come in two pieces, like a half shell, right? So it's a ball, and we split them in half, and we actually glued them to the side of the truck wrap design to make it look like bubbles. Right. So think about like how disruptive like a simple thing like that is when they're parked, at a Home Depot or something like that. And people go by and they want to touch it because it's an actual plastic bubble that's literally just glued to the side of this really colorful truck wrap design. So how do we make it disruptive? Those are just little simple things. So when I think about power washing, obviously there's a soap element to it. Like little things like that can go a long way to having people recognize, very quickly what you do, and secondly, be disruptive so that they remember it later on when they need service.
Yeah, disruptive is a really good way to describe it, because whether it's, a truck wrap, Facebook ad, whatever it is, when people are seeing the same, guy holding a pressure washer house, same exact thing, the logo over and over again, they're thinking, it's just another pressure washing business. But then when they see something that completely throws them off, they're like, wait, is this a pressure washing business, or what exactly is this? But that split second where they're now looking deeper in your company, trying to learn a bit more, that is what's going to leave a lasting impression.
Yeah, 100%. The other thing too to keep in mind also, Michael, is how does brand affect recruitment? Right? How do you get the top tier people to want to work for your company? When you look super homegrown, it's hard to attract top tier talent. I mean, I probably sounds really painfully obvious, but that goes a long way. Sometimes when people say, I can't get anybody that wants to work for me, and then you look at what are they going to get? Like, what does the truck look like? What does the uniforms look like? How, what image does the company project to a potential employee, not just the people you're trying to sell to? So never forget too that you have your future employees as a target audience, in addition to Mrs. Smith, who's also your target audience.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point as well. They have, again, another just very cheap logo, very poor branding. No one really wants to represent that.
Yes, 100%.
Cool. So, last thing before we move on, I'm just curious when it comes to colors, because I've seen a lot of talk around, different colors evoke different emotions. That's why you see a lot of fast food companies with similar color patterns in their logos. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things to consider when it comes to maybe, color scheme or, the coloring you're going to use for your branding?
Yeah. I mean, colors are really, really important. Colors aid in recognition. They aid in making the brand more memorable. So the way that we typically go about choosing colors for any particular company, regardless of the vertical, is really looking and identifying what are the prevalent colors already existing in that particular market. So for example, if I was a power washing company and I was starting my business tomorrow, I would basically go on Google and try to find the top 10 other power washing companies within 10, 15 miles of my location. And what I would do is I would look at all of their logos. I would then look at all of their truck wraps, and I would try to figure out, I would put them all on a board, and I would say, okay, 8 of them are using blue, right? Because the power washes, everyone wants to use blue because blue is water, blue is clean, etc., right? And they're all using hand wands as part of their logo, right? Because, homeowners are apparently too dumb to understand that you do power washing without having a hand wand, right? I'm being facetious there, of course, right? So I would say, okay, well, I'm not going to use a power washer, a hand wand thing. I'm not going to use blue because it's going to be very hard for me to stand out in my own market because there's 5 other power washers or 8 other power washers using blue. So maybe I will use purple and apple green. Okay, because no one else in my market can own those brand colors. So always look to the market to sort of dictate what makes the most sense, what is the most likely brand colors that can only be associated with my name and not 10 other guys. It's one of the reasons why, like for HVAC, for example, we don't really love the red, white, and blue color scheme because in any given market, there's 10 other HVAC contractors who are all using red, white, and blue. So why do I think I would stand out if I was also using red, white, and blue? Not to mention that, of course, it's associated with Americana. And when you see red, white, and blue, I want you to only think about my brand. Well, that's really hard to do with that particular color scheme because of the Americana, because there's so many other people using it. So always look at colors from a perspective of what can I use in my brand that no one else in my market is using. Therefore, as soon as they see my site sign, as soon as they see my truck or my billboard, they're going to remember only my company and not think of these other companies using the same colors.
That's great. So 2 really good points you just said is number 1, see what the rest of your market is doing and then do the opposite. That way you can actually differentiate yourself amongst them. But the second thing is look at it from a larger scheme. Like if you're red, white, and blue, then anytime someone sees those colors, they're obviously not thinking of you. They're thinking of, the U.S. flag. But if you have a certain color scheme that is, found in some random place, and you're really the only company that has that color scheme, they're going to tie that back to you, and they're going to be thinking about your company.
100%.
That gave me and anyone watching a really good understanding of what to think about when creating your name, creating the color scheme, starting to build out the logo, stuff to consider. Now, in terms of implementation, let's say someone is starting the business and, they're very limited on budget. They don't have the means of spending tens of thousands of dollars on proper branding. And, hopefully one day they will be able to, but initially they're just not at that point. How should they go about it initially? Should they try to do it themselves on a platform? Should they hire a freelancer? Like, what are your thoughts in that regard?
So the first step, and I'm going to be completely self-promotional, is you read this book, and the Branded Not Blanded book will really help you understand what you should be looking for. There's also tips in there about working with a designer, working with an agency, working with a freelancer, working with a sign shop, whatever you're going to choose to do. I personally like the idea of trying to work with maybe a local sign shop or wrap company, because obviously the logo itself has to be applied to the vehicle or the trailer or whatever you're going to be using to transport the equipment. And so you have to make sure that the logo is being designed for that medium. And that's really important to understand, right? Is how does the logo translate onto a truck wrap? And a lot of like, Fiverr, 99 Designs, a lot of those freelance places or crowdsourcing places, I should say, they don't really understand that. And I think you'd be better served working with someone locally, being one-on-one, having direct communication to who you're working with, and to engage in a conversation. Like, I really dislike the crowdsourcing option, mainly because it doesn't allow for that type of communications to transpire. And you have to remember too, when you use crowdsourcing, you're essentially saying, I'm gonna pay one person for the design if they win my contest, so to speak, right? Think about the fact that there's 29 other people out of the 30 that do your contest that are going to get paid zero. And so how much effort do you think everyone that participates in these contests are actually putting into developing something that is uniquely crafted for you? It's not likely. And the one other caution I would say about crowdsourcing is we've been a victim of, dozens, if not hundreds of our logos that were designed for other companies being completely ripped off and sold to someone else. So, if you buy a logo that was trademarked by another company, I can tell you it's going to suck at a certain point when you get a cease and desist and you can't use the logo. And then you have no recourse also. So like if you use crowdsourcing, you're not going to go to Fiverr and say, hey, reimburse me for the $5,000 I just spent on my truck wrap design. They have zero accountability for that. So I think you're just better off with someone local that you can communicate and have a real conversation with. And go to them with an idea of, what you have in mind and communicate that. Obviously pick someone also whose work they have examples of work you really like, right? So look in their portfolio, do your homework and understand kind of what you have in mind also, and work with a professional if you can, there's I think some good options in that regard that are going to be more budget friendly for you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So rather than going the route of hiring a freelancer, going to one of these sites where you're really just speaking with someone behind a screen, call up your local, print shops, visit people in person, kind of see their work, see some of the past clients they've worked with, and potentially just have them make your designs initially until you can afford the higher end services, but initially just go through them. Yeah,
and the other thing too, Michael, to keep in mind, I think a lot of owners make the mistake of saying, in directing a designer to build a logo that they specifically like themselves personally. And I say that in the sense that one just needs to always keep in mind that the logo isn't built for you, it's built for who you're selling to, and just keep them as your primary goal, right? Because if Mrs. Jones loves your logo and she remembers it, and there's 1,000 Mrs. Jones within a 5-mile radius of where you're trying to do your work, and they keep calling you because it connects to them, I think you're going to love your logo eventually because you're going to see the results that it might bring. So always just keep in mind the logo is built for who you're selling to as your primary objective, and you're essentially the secondary objective. Now, clearly, I want you to like your logo. I'm not saying, oh my God, put up a logo you hate and you're not proud of. But you see sometimes people make mistakes with how the brands are built because, they want to personally like it, or they want their guys to personally like it. And they're forgetting that in most situations, especially in home service, those decision makings are done by women. And so make sure the brand communicates to them, speaks to them, connects to them, and it'll serve you much better. Like one common error you see too, sometimes, Michael, is you see when people use mascots, they'll use mascots that look super muscled and and the guy's all jacked, right? And they think, oh, that looks cool, it shows we're capable and everything else like that. And again, you have to remember that the homeowner brings a ton of bias against contractors in general, and now you're just contributing to that stereotype. You're contributing to their bias, right? Because they're scared about who they're inviting to their home to work on their home, and now you're putting out an image that suggests that the person that's coming to their home maybe is aggressive, maybe is muscled, maybe if I don't pay, this guy's going to beat the crap out of me, whatever the case may be, right? So always keep in mind, she's the person that is making the decision. How does it make her feel? How does it connect to her? Would she remember it later on? All those things factor into, as you're directing someone to build your own brand. Keep that audience really top of mind, and it'll serve you much better.
That's really important to take into consideration, and also just a very funny example, but very true. I mean, that's literally what is going through some people's mind. So from our perspective as the business owner, we're trying to think of not what we like, but what we think the customer avatar would like. Is there a way we could actually test this to have an idea, a rough estimate of what people, engage with the most or what they like the most before actually bringing it to market?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly can get a sample audience of people that fit that exact demographic. So maybe it's women aged 35 to 55 years old that own a home, right? And poll some. Maybe you've got neighbors, you've got friends and family. You have to just be a little careful with friends and family because they bring also a set of bias to the table. So sometimes it's often better just with people who you don't really know at all. But just try to think. Again, put yourselves in their shoes and try to ask yourself these questions. Would they remember it? How would it make them feel if they saw it? And does it evoke a brand promise? Does it make them feel like you would be better suited for this job than someone else? And if you can meet those objectives, then you're on the right path, right? And you have a higher likelihood of success if you can meet those objectives. So again, too, that's again, I hate to keep harping on the name part, but when you don't have or start with that, now you're hoping that the visuals are going to do some of the heavy lifting that the name could have been doing on its own without any graphics, right? So that's why that piece is so important.
100%. That's a great strategy. A lot of people will do that with their closest friends, closest family, people that are either not in their customer avatar or just, like you said, completely biased. But by maybe going to a local Facebook group, a neighborhood group, just asking random strangers that you don't know and seeing their genuine opinion, you're going to get, genuine feedback, and that will help you that much more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So I know we're getting down to the final minutes here. Aside from everything we've discussed so far today, do you feel like there's anything else that someone who is, starting a business, they need to, create their branding, their logo, their brand identity, they're creating all these things before getting started? Is there anything else they should consider? And by the way, in the future, once they have the budget for it, they can just go to a company like yours and not have to think twice about it because you'll do all the heavy lifting for them. But in those initial stages when they don't have the fortune of doing that, is there anything else you feel like they should take into consideration when building out their brand?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things that are really important, and the notion of this 5 Mile Famous is something that's really, really critical, right? So the notion of 5 Mile Famous is within 5 miles of where your home base is, how many of those people can we get to recognize our brand, recognize who we are, right? So a couple of things you can be doing to really affect that. Number one, I really believe in the grassroots efforts and simple things like, first of all, going to home shows. Second of all, going to parades. Third, sponsoring local softball leagues, local soccer teams, right? Getting your name in front of the people that are most likely to use you, right? So the sight signs are such a simple thing because if I'm driving through the neighborhood, I see my neighbors already using you. Now I've assigned a sense of quality, a sense of trust, because if my neighbor trusts you, then I probably would trust you also, right? So some of those grassroots efforts are not expensive. They're cheap, and they get your name in front of the ideal type of people you want. And secondly, the truck is really, really important. Sadly, most truck wraps are done incorrectly. They're overloaded with too much information. You see a lot of power washers that want to list every single thing that they can possibly clean. Most people understand that power washing covers a lot of stuff. Like, I don't need to put that you can do patios. I don't need that you can do, houses and decks and stuff like that. Like, that's obvious. Like, you're a power washer. Like, I get it. Like, I don't need to be overloaded with 18 bullets on the side of your truck, because what all those do is it minimizes the actual brand name. So a lot of times all this information that you're trying to cram on your truck wrap comes at the expense of your own actual brand name, which is infinitely more important than a list of, sometimes, 10 painfully obvious bullet points that you do. You're like, oh, well, I got to put on there that we do this because, they might not know. And it's like, well, if they don't know, then that's probably more of a branding issue than it is anything else, right? So try to minimize the amount of words that you put on your truck wrap. Don't put silly things like Facebook logos or Instagram logos. Like, you're on Facebook. Oh my God. Like, I'm definitely calling you now. Like, seriously? Like, who says that? Like, why is the Facebook logo on your truck? Because you think that makes you more legit? Like, come on. Like, it's expected that you're on the social media platforms. Don't advertise for Facebook. You don't need to do that. So keep it super clean. Keep it only about your brand. Even at this point, like, honestly, probably 75% of every wrap design that we do today doesn't even have a phone number on there. The website is infinitely more important than a phone number ever will be. If we have the space and we can put two, maybe we'll put two. But, listen, if you can't figure out how to contact us from a URL when the call button is right there, like, think about the last time you were out in the wild and you literally typed in, 9 digits of a phone number into your phone. Like, when was the last time you did that? Or were you more likely to go online, see the name of the company, and do call now from the Google listing that showed up afterwards? Right. So, the use of phone numbers today has become something that is not really as relevant as it once was. So keep your truck wraps simple, keep them easy to read, keep them colorful so that they're disruptive. And don't forget how important it is for you to be seen right within your community. Otherwise, again, you're just going to be spending and spending and spending on Google for all your leads. So I think it's a long-term effort, and it's a long game branding. But I think a lot of guys just are more of the notion that they have to continue to just keep being a slave to Google and keep paying Google in most instances because their branding is really weak.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. If you have way too much going on in your truck, that, less is more. So that kind of starts to take away from the effectiveness, because if there's tons of call to actions, you have Facebook, phone number, all these things, people don't know which one to do. And in the split second they see your truck, they might not even have enough time to do any of them because they didn't decide which one they did. But if you just had one call to action, then they can focus on that thing, and there'll be I'm assuming, I don't know the data, but I'm assuming there'd be a way higher rate of people that actually, end up following through that call to action.
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome. And so one small thing that I'm just curious about is QR codes are becoming much more popular nowadays. Is that something you guys are implementing into car wraps or truck wraps and designs and things like that?
We are not really big advocates of QR codes on truck wraps, mainly because the logistics of actually trying to scan a code in a mobile environment are much more challenging. Like, I legit tried to do it a couple of times while I was a passenger, and it's almost impossible to get it in that environment. I understand you may say, oh, well, when it's parked, people can scan it. And I would also then just make the counter argument that if the branding was done correctly, I don't necessarily need you to be needing to scan to find my website address. You would be able to just simply Google it and find it almost just as easily. So I'm not wild about it. In an outdoor perspective, I think there's a great use for them, certainly in print and other avenues, but I just don't necessarily really believe that outdoor is the best use of QR codes.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, if it's parked, then they have the time to type.
It's funny. I used to make this statement that the weaker your brand, the bigger your phone number was on your truck. Right. So if you really think about that, right. So you see sometimes huge phone numbers, and it's generally because the branding is really weak. And I sort of think the same mindset when it comes to QR codes is like the bigger the QR code, the weaker your own brand generally is. Because again, if it's a great brand, you don't necessarily need that crutch to get people to go to your website.
Absolutely. Okay. Also, just curious, if not, no worries, but do you have any like possible like examples of like either truck wraps or any marketing material that you could share just as like kind of like a guideline or inspiration for some people watching us?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a number of presentations that I've given on the subject that are on our YouTube channel on KickCharge. So if you just go on YouTube and just type in KickCharge, there's a lot of really cool examples of before and afters where I literally walk through what the old brand looks like on their truck and how the new brand solved all the problems we identified on the initial brand. So there's a series of, I think, 10 videos there that are literally before and after explorations so people better understand the psychology behind what we do. So there's a lot of that type of content also, in addition to obviously the book that we put out for free just to try to help owners, leverage a brand and have it do, just be more effective in their marketing.
For sure. Yeah, and also this is kind of what you've been explaining throughout the entire interview. Eventually, and even initially, you might not be the one creating your graphics. You might not be the one actually taking action on all of these things, but it's still important that you understand the psychology behind it and you understand all these things so you can properly outsource it and be able to tell whether it's good quality work, if you're getting your money's worth and everything. So hopefully anyone watching this that decides, if they're in a position they can invest into a higher end company like yourself, definitely recommend you guys reach out to Dan. But if not, even if you're going the route of working with, a local shop or someone else to do it for you, it's still important that you understand all of these things. So, watching this entire call, watching, the videos on your YouTube channel, reading the book, getting resources like that so you understand all this better is going to help so much more, and you're going to get so much more value out of investing into your branding if you actually understand what they're doing and not just trusting that they know what they're doing.
Definitely.
I hope everyone watching this video gets a lot of value out of it. I know I definitely did. Dan, this was super valuable, so I really appreciate your time today. For anyone that's watching this that does want to learn more from your resources and also just learn a bit more about you and what you guys do, where could they find you guys?
Sure. You can just hit us up on kickcharge.com and, happy to help. Even if people are working on their branding or they had somebody else working on their branding and they want another set of eyes, just shoot me an email and I'm happy to take a look at it and offer some advice on maybe how to improve it if there's a way that I can help with that.
Well, cool. So once again, Dan, thank you for hopping on today.
You got it. Thanks, Michael.